Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed Ve'emet, Notzer Chesed L'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Afesha, V'Chata'a V'Nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed Bemet, Notzer Chesed L'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Afesha, V'Chata'a V'Nakeh. V'chata'a v'nakeh. Rabbi?
Shalom, everybody. It's great to be with you here this morning, L'Shana Tova. We have a really wonderful program for you this afternoon. Can this marriage be saved? A really fantastic scene, a little play that we put together for you. It's going to focus on some really important themes of the High Holy Days. As you just heard, the cantor sung Adonai, Adonai, which is taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 34, as God reveals God's presence to Moses and the Israelite community. And, they shout out these attributes of God, that God is gracious and merciful and loving, forgiving sin, etc., etc. It's a really powerful moment, these 13 attributes of God. And it has led Bible scholars and rabbis and philosophers and theologians to really think about the nature, the essence of God. What does God mean to us in our day-to-day lives? How do we view God? Through what lens do we understand the divine, something so huge and holy and undefinable in its way? How do we do that? And so on Yom Kippur in particular, we speak about God, and we have a lot of different God language, and we think about what our connection is, our relationship to God. It's only fitting to really dive deep into that question about God and our relationship. And to do so this afternoon, we have a little bit, again, of a play here, a little bit of a performance. It's going to articulate some of these ideas in a very, I think, creative way. And then after that, we'll have a discussion on the play, and we'll sort of talk together about what this means to us in today's world. So with all that being said, I think I'm going to turn it over to our actors, and B'hatzlacha. Let's have a great time.
Order in the courtroom, please. Court is now in session. All rise for the judge. All rise. This is going to be a long play unless we all rise. You may be seated. Your Honor, on the docket today is the divorce case of the entire human race versus God.
Pardon just one moment for technical difficulties.
God will be delayed a moment. The judge is delayed a moment.
We all wish sometimes judgment could be delayed.
Yeah, right.
There we go.
All right. Thank you, bailiff. Are both sides present?
I want it on the record that I'm here under protest.
And you are?
I am who I am.
Please just give me a straight answer.
I am beyond explanation and description.
How about please give me a straight answer, or we'll have to discuss the meaning of contempt.
How dare you? I am the creator and ruler of the universe, and you dare to judge me?
Well, I see why you want a divorce.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Whether or not there should be one, that's another question. Bailiff, will you please swear in the parties?
Yes. Human, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I'm not so comfortable with the "so help you God."
That's because you're arrogant.
It's because I'm sick of asking for help and not getting it.
Bailiff, please cut the "so help you God."
Okay. Human, raise your hand again, please, your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? God, you're not going to smite me, are you, if I leave out "so help you God"?
No, I haven't smitten in years.
And nothing but the truth, question mark.
I do.
I will now swear in God. God, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help yourself?
I do.
Now, I see by the papers filed that the human being is suing God for divorce on the grounds of alienation of affection, neglect, and abandonment.
These complaints have no merit. I'm being scapegoated for the human's
You will
inability.
get your chance. Now, how long have the two of you been married?
Okay, so that goes back to when I revealed the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, and he brought it down to earth. It was compared to a ketubah, which is like a marriage contract between me and the people of Israel.
So that was about,
About 3,000 years ago.
and how many of those years have been good ones?
12,
12?
maybe 15.
What about the Renaissance?
The Renaissance was nice.
God, why did you want a marriage contract between you and the human?
Well, of all the creatures on earth, none has meant as much to me as the human being. I admit we've had some difficult times.
The Dark Ages, 200 years without a decent thing to wear.
But my main feeling towards the human being has always been love.
And you, human, do you feel any love towards God?
On rare occasions, like when I get good news or when something terrible happens to somebody else instead of me.
If your love is that infrequent, why did you agree to a marriage contract with him?
Well, I was stuck in the desert at the time. I was hungry, and I figured he'd be a good provider.
And has he been?
On and off.
On, 100% on.
Throughout history, you let your people starve.
She's blaming again. Most of the starving is due to their inability to get along with each other.
It's your climate, and you keep moving the good farmland.
I gave you the most advanced brain on earth. It's not my fault that it took you centuries to figure out irrigation.
From day one, he's criticized everything I've done.
From day one, you've deserved it.
From day one, I was adorable.
Every day I see you commit wars in my name. I see you mangle my words beyond, to justify beyond cruelty, even my own imagination.
If these things bother you so much, how come you're always rewarding sinful behavior?
I never do that.
It seems to me a lot of selfish and evil people on earth have it pretty good.
Yeah, they won't in the afterlife.
The afterlife, the afterlife. I'm not dead yet. It's the now life.
You see what I have to put up with, Your Honor? Resentment has become the human's most common prayer.
You've been distant for so long now.
Well, maybe if you'd stop worshiping other gods.
You've worshipped other gods?
The god of fame, the god of greed, the god of technology.
Well, maybe if you answered my prayers more often.
Well, I'm sorry if I don't consider gimme, gimme, gimme a prayer.
You allow too much suffering.
You always focus on the negative. What about all my miracles?
I can't remember the last time there was a miracle.
The sun rose this morning, didn't it?
Well,
Your Honor, I've been working on this relationship for centuries. I've tried to understand him through disasters and atrocities. I've forgiven him time and time again.
You've forgiven?
He'd disappear for generations at a time. And I think, okay, he has a tough job. He travels a lot. But when I see every day what he permits,
I don't control human behavior.
I don't have faith in you anymore.
You don't?
Do you know what it's like to pray and not have your prayers answered? Do you know what it's like to yearn to believe and then constantly face acts of godlessness?
Well, God,
I'm a deity, not a panacea.
feels prayers unanswered. Okay, human, what kind of settlement would you want?
I object, I object, I object, I object.
I haven't made my decision. I just want to know.
Willing to split things 50-50. God can have the heavens. I just want earth.
Global warming, here we come.
I need a place to live.
And I created it.
I've taken care of it.
Yeah, great job you've done. The number of species you've destroyed. If I flooded the planet today, Noah wouldn't need an ark. He'd just need a dinghy.
You two have a very dysfunctional relationship. You know that?
If she would just follow my commandments.
God, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Me?
Look at her. I don't know how much you've really neglected her, but she feels abandoned, don't you?
Yes.
Does that mean you're granting the divorce?
God, you're righteous, demanding, and often inaccessible. The human is rationalizing, self-pitying, and regularly irresponsible. You two are made for each other.
But
I'm not done. As damaged as your relationship is, it just seems like it has so much potential. But your expectations, the human expects God to fulfill human responsibilities. And at least according to the human, God expects the human to be better than human.
I just want the human.
Gosh, I'm directing the two of you to spend more time with each other. Quality time, starting right here, right now. You don't command, and you don't whine. In fact, I suggest you start with an apology.
I am always open to hearing her apology. You want me, the all-knowing, all-seeing creator and ruler of the universe, to apologize?
Who better to set an example?
I really do care about you.
yeah, sure.
I even turned myself into a human form to come to this trial. I was going to come as a burning bush, but I thought that'd be against fire regulations. Okay, so what do you want from me?
I need signs you care, not just words.
Day after day, I hear human couples bickering. You don't bring me flowers. You don't bring me flowers. Well, I bring you flowers every day, and birds and trees.
And disasters and atrocities and disease.
Look, I know you're upset, and well, it's a tough job balancing justice with mercy. But I assure you that despite my occasional wrath, I really do treasure our relationship.
It's more than just occasional.
I give up.
What?
I can't be in an unrequited relationship. I give up.
Then who will be in charge of?
You take it. Heavens, earth, take it all. It's yours.
Oh, no. No.
Who needs all this aggravation? Not me.
Don't go. Please.
And why not?
Because without you, life would be just us.
So?
I need more of you, God, not less.
I am here.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
It's scary. It is a scary place. I know it.
The world's become so scary.
Yes, I know. I know it has.
So very scared.
I know how scared you are. I know. I know. I know.
Miracles?
Let's have our cast come back out that we might show them our appreciation. Difficult to clap our hands, but if we can all kind of do a jazz hand sort of thing so that they can see on the screen just how wonderful their rendering of that scene was. So we have Rick Castell as God, Denise Kirschbaum as our human. We have Barbara Bachman as our bailiff. And in a typecast, we have Judge Fred Pollack. And behind the scenes was our director, Linda Goldman. A huge thank you to these 5 phenomenal people who brought to life some of the challenges that the rabbi really set out for us in his sermon earlier today. So a huge thank you to the 5 of you. And let's one more time give them the equivalent of a round of applause. So theater is such an amazing way for us to get into a topic. I want to start there. So I am going to share my screen. To anyone else who is currently a host or co-host, can you please keep your eye on people coming into our time together late so that they can be welcomed in? So I want to start with what resonated in this script, and we're going to use the chat function for a bit. What resonated from this script? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have that kind of personal conversation, relationship with God, that finally, when the human gets to look face to face with God, what really resonated with you during this scene? I'll give you a moment to consider, and please put it into the chat. Thank you, Sandy. So a lot of it hit home for Sandy. All the problems in the world lead us to question our faith. Thank you, David. So true. So true. And don't we wish that it were easier to understand them? From Sharon, it's such a difficult time for people. We need God even more. Agreed, agreed. Ruth, everything is give and take. Yeah, that's so true. The little bells, we really need God. The doubt that arises when the lack of miracles and the awful things happening in the world. Yes, this lack of miracles. How do we see the things around us as those miracles? I think it's really difficult. The older I get, the more I understand the relationship I need to have with God, and that it is daily maintenance that makes that relationship rich and present. I think like our human relationships, if we don't foster them, if we don't spend that time, if we don't bring ourselves to them, they start to fizzle. We are half of the equation in a relationship with God. I so appreciate people's honesty here. What questions are you left considering from this script? I want to get a sense of where people are at. I know that one of the questions for me is, when do I get to have that one-on-one, that personal conversation with God? Oh, so true, Tony, that it's up to us to make a difference, that it is that we play an important role in this relationship. From Polly, how hard it is to have a relationship, and without faith in one another, the easier it is to doubt love. Wow. Faith is a hard thing to come by. And I think in the past 18 months, faith is something that has really lost the fervor that maybe for some it might have had beforehand. From Ruth, should we hold God accountable for so much that happens? What a great question. Is God accountable, or are we accountable? For whom do we place that blame, and does blame even do anything? Or does simply asking the question force us to look upon ourselves? From Denise, I think Rabbi's words about a partnership is so true. I totally agree. We need to pay attention to the positives rather than the negatives. Bonnie, if only that were as easy to do as putting it in a chat. We, as the scene set up, we are so prone as humans to self-pity and doubt and all of these things that make us a terrible partner with God. And yet that is our eternal partner. From Christine, how do we let go of disappointment in other humans causing pain in this world and still embrace hope for the future? Couldn't agree more with these things. We are in such a moment of questions. And there are more questions than there are answers. And I think as long as we start to ask them and start to discuss them, I think that's part of how we heal. But I want to come back to this question about God. And when I think about God, you know, I love that Rick labeled himself as G-D, that even the language that we use for God, how we write God's name, how we type God's name, we all approach it differently. And I will say, Rick did a phenomenal job as God. We could have just as easily have cast Denise as God and Rick as the human. I say that out loud because and that's part of what I'm going to talk about, is we do have this inclination of referring to God as masculine. And the only reason why in the scene God was masculine is because those are the pronouns that Rick uses. But we could have just as easily have flipped it. So I want to go back to this notion of language and how we even begin to have this conversation with God when God is, as God says in the script, I am beyond explanation and description. The quote that's referring to is Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am what I am. That when God is asked, what is God's self? Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am what I am. That really doesn't help humans who need language, who need visuals to understand something. So a quick exercise, no need to answer these questions. I know that you are answering them silently at home. So what is this? Bird, one answer, quick.
Bird.
All right,
Sun.
what is this? We have a sun. What is this?
Tree.
Tree.
We know this, this is a tree. Does everyone agree about these answers? Thumbs up. We've got thumbs up all around. These we know, we see them, and we immediately associate a title for them. Okay, what emotion do we see?
Fright.
All right, someone says fright.
Uncertainty.
Feel free to unmute and start to answer now.
Uncertainty.
Puzzled.
Uncertainty, puzzled,
Sad.
sad,
Scared.
scared,
Confused.
confused. Excellent. All right, next. What emotion do we see?
Thoughtful.
Okay.
Thoughtful. Thinking.
Bored.
Bored. Okay.
Teenager.
That's not an emotion, but I hear you. And all the
Contemplative.
emotions that go along with that difficult time in life.
Yeah.
How about this one? What emotion do we see?
Active.
Very little.
Serious.
Fear.
Yeah.
So I think that when we're talking about emotion, it's gotten all the harder for us to identify the emotions of one another when we've had to wear those masks for safety. So we're talking about, how do we identify what we see? I think it's become even more difficult with the masks. All right, next one. What is this?
Nothing.
It is nothing.
Blank.
A blank screen.
It is a blank. It is a rectangle.
Avoid.
A void.
Hmm?
So I'm going to tell you, this is a piece of art. This is a white canvas. It is painted white. I painted it last night.
But you
Or
call that is what somebody would call art, but I don't believe that.
But white,
Excellent.
the color white is a combination of all colors of the spectrum.
Oh, see, Rick, you're getting ahead of me here. So perhaps this is a lovely beach scene covered in snow. Perhaps this is a tile floor covered in milk. Actually, this is a Van Gogh painting completely covered in white chalk. So the basis of these questions comes from a play called Art by Yasmina Reza, not a new play. I saw it about 20 years ago, but it left such a mark that it's where I want to go here. So 3 guys spend 90 minutes talking about a white canvas, and they raise all the things that you have just done in a rather thoughtful and humorous way. Some agree with Bob, some agree with Rick. It is the question, the essence, is this art? That is what they discussed for 90 minutes with all of these possibilities in there. Is it so different from our lifetime of trying to find a definition or understanding of God? So interesting to consider that the ambiguity in defining art is similar to the ambiguity in defining God. If God is the creator of creators, it's not such a stretch. We can consider how the understanding of art in the same conversation as we try to understand God. So, and someone said this, does this art represent the absence of something or the completeness or something? I think Tony mentioned this as nothingness. Anybody disagree? Rick, you were going somewhere with that. Go ahead and make your point now.
What about all the colors?
Yep.
The colors of the rainbow, what we see as white light is actually a mixture from red to violet. That's, as I understand it, you mix all the colors together. White is the presence of all colors. Black is the absence of all colors.
But isn't it interesting that some look at this and see nothingness? And if maybe you have a scientific background, you look at this and you see that this is complete. This is the essence of shalom. It is whole. Go ahead, Sharon.
You're muted.
And just so people know, I can only see 6 boxes on my screen when I share my screen. So if you want to talk, holding up your hand is going to be, I'm limited in how many hands I can see go up. Just go ahead and say something.
But it's
Okay,
all
Sharon.
the eye of the
I like that.
beholder.
That's just what I was going to say, Tony.
Great mind, Sharon.
Yes, definitely. I was
All
gonna
right.
say if art is-
So,
Cancer, it's just like that picture that went around for years. Do you see the dress being blue and black or white and gold?
I was initially going to use that as an example, but that gets into a whole different, but yes, that's a perfect example of this, that it's in the eye of the beholder. All right, so let's look at these 3 categories. What language did we use to describe the first 3?
Motion.
Nouns.
Nouns, clear, everyone agreed. There's one answer. For emotions, what language did we use?
Adjectives.
Or feelings.
Did we agree?
No, not all.
Not all. The possibilities grew. And then with the third, talk about the language we used.
Perception.
very much perception.
Very personal.
Mhm.
Project. Objective.
Projection.
Yeah, and that's it. And in some people, if they saw it one way and someone said something else, no, they're wrong. And nobody said that outwardly, but that kind of goes along with some of the things that we've been talking about over Yom Kippur. And yes, all of those things.
Cantor, when I heard other people, though, I was thinking, oh yeah, I didn't look at it that way. That makes sense. So I didn't really think anybody was wrong. I kind of,
You see the chair.
you know,
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so maybe not that jump to that person is wrong, but oh, maybe there is a different way to see this. I like that. If you're not having our conversation with us, I'd appreciate if you could mute. But otherwise, everyone's doing great. Okay, so God, big, bold, black letters. With this very bold slide and the start of a conversation about language, so the progression that we saw before is that as we begin to discuss things with more depth, the nuance grows. That very clear pieces from creation, we see it, we know it, it's done. Emotions, we get a little bit more ambiguity because we notice things differently. And then when we start to talk about art and we start to talk about this notion, is it whole, is it nothing? All the more so, our expression grew, our adjectives grew, the amount of description grew, and the ambiguity grew. Okay, so now we're at God. We're going to go back to our chat. Because if I said before that talking about God is kind of like talking about art, we've got an enormous amount of ambiguity, an enormous amount of description, and a lot of nuance. So I want to start by getting an idea of where we are starting. So I'd like in the chat for you to type any name for God that you have used, that you are familiar with, that you like, that you dislike. You can do it in Hebrew, in English, in Sanskrit, any name for God. All right, here we go. Hashem, the name in Hebrew. Adonai, in Hebrew, we've got Adonai.
Elohim.
Nature. Say it again, Bob. Adonai, Melech. Oh, Bob said Elohim. That's what Bob said. Feel, go English, go Hebrew. We talked in the scene, God was He. The Creator.
Almighty.
Almighty. Yeah, go ahead. You can say them as well.
Okay.
Precious, Father. Almighty again.
Father.
Yep.
Hanani.
Hamakom. Melissa, how would you pronounce what you wrote?
Okay, it's Tyler.
Oh, Tyler, how would you pronounce what you wrote?
Yeewa.
He spelled it wrong.
I can't do anything right.
Okay, so right, we have Yahweh. That's good. Okay, there we go. We have all of these names for God, and even the fact that I put God in all caps changes how we understand God. So language is at the essence of how we even start to understand this God that we want a relationship with.
Oh, shit.
So God language. All right, we've got so many names for God that we just shared, including From the scene, we got creator, judge, ruler of the universe, smiter, revealer of Torah at Sinai, he, and miracle maker to add to the list. All right, so many of us have seen this name for God, Yud He Vav He. It's also called the Tetragrammatron. Woohoo! Big, long Greek word, tetra meaning four, gramma meaning letter. Therefore, it is the four-letter name for God, also known as the ineffable name of God. Why is it ineffable? Why is it unpronounceable? Forget language challenges. This recognizable name for God can't even be pronounced. Oh my gosh. So now we're trying to have a relationship with a God and we can't even say God's name. Why do we need a name for God that we can't even pronounce? No wonder we have a hard time understanding God. But let's break it down. Yud, He, Vav, He. Attempt to say just these letters. So the sounds are Y, Y, He, Vav, He, Yav, Yav. All you hear coming out of my mouth is breath, is breath. Inherent in this name is breath. In Genesis 2, we hear God formed man. I didn't change anything actually because I wanted to push some people's buttons with gender. So I haven't changed things quite consciously. God formed man from the dust of the earth. God blew into his nostrils the breath of life, nishmat chayim, and man became a living being. And notice here that the spelling of Adonai, is this Yud He Vav He. Perhaps the overuse of breath in that unspeakable name for God is to highlight that breath of life flowing through us, that gift that God has bestowed upon us. So names for God during the high holidays. As I said, the scene gave us a lot of names to relate to God. But looking at this list of names that I've pulled from our Machzor, so throughout the high holidays, here is a list of more names that we use to refer to God. How would you describe the relatability of God based in these terms?
Not very relatable.
Okay. You want to say a little bit more?
They are too above where I am. I feel like they're too out of my reach.
I'd love to hear from anybody else.
It's almost like it's not real. It's intangible.
Above us.
Uh-huh.
Too powerful.
Well, say that again?
Too powerful.
I see things I would like to be like a source of peace, a source of shalom, a source of blessing to others.
It's interesting. Some of these can be kind of aspirational, but we get caught up in the Avinu Malkeinu.
Moab City, Utah. Actually,
we get caught up in some of those unrelatable terms that we can't even get to that source of peace, the author of peace, because we're trying to figure out what the Redeemer of Israel means to us in our day-to-day lives. So Avinu Malkeinu, I want to go there because it is, I mean, it's for better or for worse, it is the core of one of the core pieces. If we didn't do it on the high holidays, I'd probably get fired. So I did it because, you know, not my plan. So Avinu Malkeinu, let's be honest. Avinu means father, Malkeinu means king. In the most recent translation in our Machzor, it translates Avinu Malkeinu to Avinu Malkeinu. So hold on to that. So let's be honest. How many of you imagine an old man in the sky, probably a beard, when you think about God? I see some reluctant head nodding, and I hear you. I feel you. All right. So as I said, when we were preparing for the scene, we wrestled, Linda and I, with, do we cast a woman as God? Do we cast a man as God? And we even discussed doing the scene twice, where they swapped roles for the second time around. So we don't expect God to be female. And when in the scene, if Denise had played God, that would have been what you remembered from the scene, because we have a problem. And that problem is that this male-centric language for God presents a real challenge for us as modern Jews. And we haven't had a long time to experience something different. So, as I said, our current Machzor translates Avinu Malkeinu as Avinu Malkeinu, trying to get around making a choice about the gender of that language. And even if we name it parent and sovereign, I don't know. It doesn't quite work for me either. And even farther, if we wanted to be envelope pushing, if we translated it to mother and queen, I don't know if we're ready for that. I don't know if we're there. So, get around that problem, and we're going to translate Avinu Malkeinu to Avinu Malkeinu. It's in Hebrew. We'll assume that you just don't know. But we do know. But we do it in Hebrew as a way of trying to not let that be the focus of the conversation, I think. So here's the reality. Hebrew is a gendered language. There is a movement within Israel developing non-gendered conjugations, but it's very difficult to get away from this. To be clear, it's not gendered that the rock is male, Tsur is not male, nor is the bird, Sipora, female, but inherent in every word is masculine and feminine. There's a lot of languages that are based in that understanding. Many of the words used for God, that list that we looked at before, are masculine. It's helping along this old man in the sky image, but I think there are other reasons that our minds go there. Why do we imagine an old guy in the sky when we think about God? It can't come from Judaism, because we read in Exodus 24, at the bottom, you shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or in the earth below, or in the waters underneath. So we already know in Commandment 2, we're not making images of God, but we end up here with the creation of Adam. And there he is, old man in the sky, the Renaissance, Michelangelo. When we look at Christian art, here we go. Where did Michelangelo get this image for God? He went back to epic source material all around him in the Greek gods. Look at that, it's Zeus. Enter Bernini's Zeus fountain. Not a perfect match, but definitely a reasonable comparison. We've got the beard, frankly, God's been working out in the Sistine Chapel. The Renaissance brought the depiction of God more often in art. Therefore, we have 600 years of imagery of the old man in the sky to push past to even imagine God beyond this image. We, as humans, image is essential to our understanding of things, right? We saw the image of the bird. We knew bird. We see this image of God, and we have been ingrained. It has been ingrained in us, God, even though we know it's not God. So when do we even more from Avinu Malkeinu to the possibility of parent sovereign? How do we get to this genderless language? So in 1975, look, it's Gates of Blue, everyone. It's our beloved Gates of Prayer. In 1975, this was the Mishkan Tefillah of its day, and it included 10 different concepts of God in 10 different Shabbat services. Now, these 10 different concepts of God, to be clear, were not genderless. What this prayer book did was take a first step towards gender inclusive language and incorporated a vote. Instead of calling it Our Fathers, it became God of all generations. And even in 1975, we did not have a vote V'imahot. All right. The next step after Gates of Prayer in our reform movement is Gates of Gray. All right. Anybody remember Gates of Gray? Did you have Gates of Gray here? So you might have kept Gates of Blue and put a sticker on the inside cover of your Gates of Blue with Avot V'imahot, because that's one of the bigger changes that this prayer book had. So why do we build in this V'imahot to our understanding? Because in 1991, Judith Plasko put out her seminary work, Standing Again at Sinai, which sparked this need for the matriarchs within our tradition. Thank you very much. It became a vote V'imahot, our fathers and our mothers, and it took until 1996 for Gates of Gray to include this gender neutral language for God. For the first time, God is no longer he exclusively. And that's 25 years ago, we only began to think about God beyond male and masculine pronouns. It's not surprising that it's difficult to imagine God beyond the old man in the sky. So we come back to God. Is this relationship working? Our scene presented such a relatable, almost human depiction of God. The language, to even begin the conversation, we have to develop what we define as God. If Avinu's not working for you, if Tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel, is not working with you, there are so many other language options for us to think about and refer to God. And I challenge you on this day where it is our goal to rebuild our relationship with God, with our community, with ourselves. I challenge you to find language that allows you to do that. Take that active role. Be 50% of the equation in finding the words to begin that relationship building with God. I pass it over to the rabbi.
Thank you so much, Cantor, for that really great deep dive into God language, especially during the high holy days. I'm just going to try to play with my view here. There we go. I'm using an iPad. My computer sort of crashed, and so I'm trying to learn Zoom on the iPad a little bit more. But it's great to see everybody this afternoon for our study session. The Cantor really brought up so many tremendous points about God language and how we refer to God and what that means. We have all these names, all these titles for God, and each of these titles gives us a different view, a different perspective. Is God one of these? Is God all of them? Is God none of them, right? It's a very interesting theological question. When you look at God, and we talk about God and with gender, that is one huge part of the puzzle. But there are so many others that we need to look at, I think, when we talk about God and God language and that greater sense of theology. Because I think really so much struggle in service when it comes to our relationship with God comes from an inability to talk about God and to be able to sort of share what we believe, why we believe it. And so we're going to do a little bit of that this afternoon. And I'm going to put in a cheap plug for Bible study and adult B'nai Mitzvah classes. We're going to delve into this even more deeply during this whole year. But if we were thinking about the Bible, Torah, the Bible itself, and we say, how is God presented? Okay, what are some of the adjectives we would use to say what God is according to the Bible? What are some ideas? How is God presented in the Bible? And we could use our chat function. That's probably the easiest. But if you want to unmute and yell them out, I can try to start that as well. But how is God described? Yeah, there we go. We got all powerful, omnipotent, right? All powerful from Lori. Thank you. We have all knowing and all healing. From Tony, we have creator. That's right. Any other ideas from God in the Bible? One of our big loving kindness we got as well. Thank you for that. One of the big changes, right, that the Israelite people, the Jewish people gave to the world is a different conception of God, right? Because before, right, we understood that in a pagan world, there were many gods, right? There was polytheism, right? There was the belief in many different kinds of gods. And Judaism brings to the forefront the idea of one God, monotheism, right? So God is one and alone. We get that in the Torah. We get it better in the later books of the Bible. This really idea that there is one God and nobody else, right? It's part of our prayer service that God is one. God, we have in the Bible, even though God is described sometimes as having features, you know, we have references to God's hand. We have representation of God's nose. God's nose gets hot when God is angry. Vichar af, you know, the God's nose gets inflamed as a representation of God's anger. But classical theology would say God has no body, right? So even though we have this conception of the old man, and it's like the anthropomorphic vision of God that we get of the old man and the beard that the cantor so nicely described for us, right? In classical theology, you know, God has no body. God is a spiritual being, all essence of love and concern for creation. I'm just going to check the chat for a second here. We had forgiver. And when I think of God, I feel comfort, but necessarily see something. God as source of forgiveness and comfort is really important. And every once in a while, God in the Torah and God in the Bible ain't so forgiving, right? There are times when God smacks people around when things go astray. So there's times when God is angry and God is vengeful and God is wrathful. God, it says all powerful, God can upset the laws of nature, right? And so the natural world, the world that we live in, the environment, that's for us to enjoy and for us to understand. But when things go upside down, right, that is by definition then an act of God. God can subvert nature in classical theology. And we'll get to that great question in a moment. We mentioned God's all-knowingness. God in classical theology is all good. God and good are related words, right? So by definition, you know, God is good. And then God, as we said, is supernatural. If everyone could help me out with the mute button, that would be great. Unless you're actively sort of answering a question, that'd be fantastic. And God is outside of as well as within the universe. And then because part of God's all-knowingness, God hears our prayers, God knows us, and is able to answer them, but we might not be able to realize how or when God will answer our prayers. So these are all very classical, biblical, rabbinic ideas of God. Some of these we might agree with, some of them we might not agree with. As a quick poll, you know, and again, I'm going to do my best to scan through. Do you believe that God is omnipotent, that God is all powerful? You can raise your hand for omnipotent. I don't see a lot of hands. I'm scrolling through, that's all I'm saying. See a lot of head shaking and going the other way. What about omniscient? What about God knowing everything? Does God know everything? Or do we have hands for that? Any hands for omniscient? Oh, this is a rough crowd in terms of classical theology. I like to see that. That's good. Oh, we got a few hands. There we go. We got a few hands going on omniscient. That's very nice. Would someone mind unmuting and telling me what God being omniscient means to you? Like, what does it mean to have an all-knowing God?
Rabbi,
Yep, I hear a voice.
aren't we responsible for ourselves and our behavior according to what we taught?
Are we responsible for ourselves and our behavior?
Yeah.
I'd hope so.
It's not that.
I'm not getting it. There's a lot of, is that just me? But I'm hearing a lot of distortion.
God, all-knowing God.
No, Barbara is frozen. That's why her,
Yeah.
we couldn't hear her.
And you guys are all frozen here.
It's on your end, Barbara.
I know,
Yeah.
I can't help it.
Yeah, the joy. Yeah, and so we have a question about determination, right? About behavior. Again, we'll touch on free will in a moment, right? But because there is that question of God's role in the world, God's role in our lives. And I said there's that classical theological conception where God does actively intervene, right? God works through history. You know, we have events that happen in the Bible because God allows them to happen, you know, for the good or for the bad. And we think about this on Yom Kippur, we think about it more in terms of like our deeds have resonance, right? What we do matters. And this goes into, again, classical theology, that if we do good things, good stuff is supposed to happen. If we do bad things, bad stuff is supposed to happen. And in the play that we just heard, part of the disconnect, right, is that human beings going, there's a lot of bad going on. There's a lot of rough things that are happening in the world. Maybe we can get a little break. You know, where's some of that peace, love, and rock and roll, you know, that we're supposed to have, because we think we're doing good in the world. We're trying to at least do good. And sometimes we see people who are rotten, you know, doing well. And so that becomes a very big disconnect, a little bit of a break with classical theology, right? And it's ingrained, again, obviously in the Bible, as we've learned together on more than one occasion, that when the prophets are speaking to the people, you know, of the southern kingdom of Judah, northern kingdom of Israel, what's their message, right? Do good, or God's going to give you a zetz. You know, you're going to get a smack from the heavens if you don't behave yourself. And you have to start doing good things. You got to start, you know, connecting again to the Torah, to the commandments, and living a good life, or else God's going to let bad things happen to you. And so the idea is that God removes God's self from the equation, right? And God sort of departs, and that's when the bad things can happen. It's the idea of hastir panim, the idea of God turning God's face away, which is, by the way, difficult theology as well, right? The idea of saying that God somehow ignores or turns, you know, the divine back, and that's when bad things are allowed to happen, right? And so there's a question of causation. If we do bad things always happen to us? Just from a pure, just like, forget theology for a second, in our own experience of the world, right? When we're witnessing what happens in society, do the good guys always win?
No.
No. And do the bad guys sometimes win?
Yeah.
And how is this squared? And we had it in the play. How is this squared? How is this circle, you know, completed? Just change geometric shapes on us. How do we solve this problem? It was in the play, folks.
We solve it through love, which was what your sermon was about.
We solve it for ourselves through love. But I'm saying the question of why do bad things happen, you know, to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? How do we make sense of that in this world? We say, you know what? Afterlife, in the next world, that's when things are going to be figured out. And as we heard from the human in the play, that's not what we want to hear, because we're here now. and we want things to make sense today, right? So if we have this view of God controlling everything that happens here, and there's a lot of bad stuff, it brings us back to that primary question, the question that all religious faith traditions have to answer to be relevant at all in the world, is, again, going back to Kushner, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? You have to have an answer to that as a theology, or else you're in trouble, because you have to somehow justify God. Sorry. You have to justify God, right? You have to be able to make sense of it. And if you can't, what you have is rotten theology. And rotten theology then leads to people leaving whatever faith tradition it is. Because if we see with our eyes that what we believe is wrong, we're going to stop believing it, if that makes sense, right? And so if our view of God is always just, and justice should flow forth from the earth, and we look around and we go, wait a minute, there ain't a lot of justice, right, in the world, then we can then say, well, wait a minute, I have to throw out that belief. After that belief isn't right? And are we willing to do that and then create a different kind of view of God? If I ask you right now, does God exist? Just straight. Does God exist? Can we prove the existence? Well, forget proving for a second. Forget proving. Do we believe that God exists? However we define it. Can we get a little bit of a hand raise? For that, or a thumbs up? Does God exist? Okay, so we need to have some theism versus atheism. And then the follow-up question for that would be, if we were doing this one-on-one or in a small group, and I'm also trying to be conscious of the time, is what's the God that you don't believe in, right? And what is the description of the God that we don't believe in? Because go ahead, Barbara. Go ahead.
Because you can't blame things on a God for everything that happens. You can't blame yourself. If you stole something, like your story this morning with the apple, if you steal something and you get picked up by the cops, that's not God making a bad thing happen. That's because of what you did.
What about earthquakes?
He has no control over that. He's not a physical, what would you call a physical thing that controls our weather systems or but that's the trade-off. Listen, when my father died, I thought there was no God.
Yeah.
I thought there's no God at all,
No God at all.
Right. When my father died when I was 14, yeah.
I'm hearing a lot of static. I'm sorry, but yes, no. One would understand, that belief, right? Because when bad things happen that shatter us, right, and we say, if God exists, this wouldn't happen, right?
Yep.
Then we put God away, and so we either have to put God away or we have to change our definition, right? And that's where it goes. You articulated that very well. Thank you for sharing that. That personal struggle. That's very meaningful.
Yeah.
Was there another person who wanted to speak? I thought I saw someone trying to get in.
I think God teaches good and bad, and it's man that decides of whether they're going to be good or bad in any circumstance. About the earthquakes, stuff like that, because man is not climate change and stuff like that. So God has both good and bad coming towards us.
And no one's responsible for an earthquake. No one is responsible for an earthquake.
And that would be dualism. Hold on. Gotta muting. Sorry, we have to just do a little muting because that's a lot of distortion. Okay. So one of my favorite philosophers, theologians, is Maimonides. And certainly in our adult education experiences with me, I do a lot of Maimonides. And he talked about this idea, and if memory serves, I think I actually did this sermon last year, but the idea that Maimonides tries to take on the idea of evil in the world, or how do we figure this out in relationship to God, why evil exists in the world. And Maimonides would teach, right, and say, look, it's an evil in the world that there are natural disasters, perhaps. And he would say, look, that's how the world is. God created a world, an environment, an ecosystem. And sometimes an ecosystem has some rough parts to it, like earthquakes and floods and hurricanes, but God doesn't send them, right, to punish us, right? That's the difference, that they exist as part of the world, and maybe they're not fun, but they exist as part of the natural world. Now, if there were, so 10 plagues, right, God sends to the Egyptians. And let me tell you my favorite one. It's the hail. The hail coming from the heavens. Do you know why the hail is my favorite? Because if you read the text, the hail comes down, and then when it hits the ground, it explodes into fire, right? And so God creates in one plague fire and ice together, which is not possible, right? That is a violation of natural law. It is, by definition, a miracle to have that sort of happen, right, as a plague. It's a really cool special effect. But the idea being that God can subvert the natural world. And so if we had, today with hail coming down that bursts into fire, we'd have a different conversation, because that is not natural. So that's sort of beyond that. Then we could say maybe God's behind that one. But the run-of-the-mill earthquake and a hurricane, whatever it is, that's just part of the price we have for living on this beautiful blue and green orb known as Earth, right? Maimonides would say, what about people who get sick? Maimonides is a doctor, right? Being sick is terrible. And in classical theology, right, and in the Bible, we have this too, right? You can get sick from God, right? God can give you a plague. God can give you leprosy, God can give you whatever it is. God can strike you with illness. And so Maimonides has to answer the question is God responsible for illness? And the answer is no. God's not responsible for illness in his conception, that our bodies are made of matter, matter decays, we get sick. Right? It's just, again, part of the price we pay for mortality, that because we are human, we get sick. And that is not something, and we see the note here from Lori, right, with COVID-19. I was actually, quick segue to that, thank you, Lori, is that I was actually asked the question from another minister recently, is what do you think God is telling us by allowing COVID-19 to happen? And I answered her, God doesn't work that way. And that was sort of it, because that's my belief. I don't believe God sends us plagues anymore. Those days, if they ever did exist, are over now. Biblical, fine, but not today. So we have the evils, right, of illness, the evils of natural disasters. We have the illness of, and this goes back to it, we sort of briefly touched upon it, but it's also in the play as well. Maimonides gives the example. You're walking down the street, you finish your shopping at Publix, and someone comes up behind you, smacks you on the head, and takes your wallet, takes your purse, whatever it is. Can you blame God for that? And of course, the answer is no, because Maimonides says sometimes people stink. It isn't the exact translation. I'm going to, use a little bit of extra garnish on it. But yeah, that's Maimonides' understanding, is sometimes people are terrible. And that's just reality. That's part of free will. That's part of our autonomy. So the play tries to bring up all these different ideas of the human being and God going back and forth about, well, you're letting this happen. God saying, well, that's not my fault, and the human beings are saying, well, wait a minute, what about this? And God and the human being are arguing about personal responsibility. Whose responsibility is it in the end? And we hope that the answer comes as it's a partnership, right? That we have a responsibility, and that, we might hope or believe that God has some sense of responsibility as well. Just give me 1 second. I see a question on the chat I want to get to. And it's from Sharon. It's an affirmation, the idea of free will, right? That God knows, is that God has given us the ability, right, to do what is right, to create a better world. That we have this idea that God gives us that capability, that intelligence, that will to do the right thing. So it's a struggle, but God gives us that ability. Yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
I was just say, and Judge Pollock, if you think about it, he never made a decision whether or not we could, we could divorce God. But humans were happy in the end because she found a miracle.
Because there was a miracle, right? That was a little hook. That was a little twist at the end.
Right.
And that's one of the things I wanted to really express today in the sermon, is that I think there's sometimes a disconnect, again, that gulf between, if we reject classical theology I think some people then say, well, we reject God because God doesn't exist. God doesn't meet the parameters that the Bible sort of sets out. And I think the struggle for us, and it's not a new one, the struggle is a couple thousand years old, at least, of people trying to understand and rationalize and create and justify and prove a God, right? A God's existence. And what does that mean, for us? And so rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, when it comes to God not working in the way we might have been taught 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago that God is supposed to work, to instead say, well, wait a minute, let's come up with a different idea and a different understanding of what God is or what God isn't, right? And let's be able to create that together. Now, one of the challenges I'd like to sort of put out there for you is to really think on that question of what is God for you? Who is God? What is God? How is God? Why is God? Whatever question word you want to put in front of there that might make sense. What is that for you? What's your relationship with God like? How do you define it for yourself? And put that in writing for yourself and sort of write what God is and maybe what God isn't. Try to crystallize that and reflect on it, ruminate on it, see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And then hopefully throughout the year, maybe through an adult ed class, maybe through some private reading, whatever it might be, study, right? Study some different ideas and conceptions of what other people thought God might be or what God might not be. Because when we do this, I think it brings us a fuller understanding and a fuller conception of the divine, the holy, the sacred, whatever that means for us, right? We have gone, thank God, as Cantor again pointed out in the beginning. I'm trying to hope that we push past the old man with the beard, on high. We have these ways of talking about God, but thinking about God, understanding God, that's for us to now figure out, as well. It's a process, right? That how we thought about God 2,000 years ago might not be the way we want to think about God today. We want to think about God differently. And it's to engage in that struggle and not to push it away. I think that's the key for spirituality. That's the key for theology, is being willing to struggle with it. We are Yisrael, right? Which literally means we are the God wrestlers. Right? We are the ones who struggle and strive to fight with God, not only about fighting literally with God, but fighting about understanding of what God is. And that's up to us to put in that work. And I think if we do so, it really helps for us to create a better understanding, not only of God, but ourselves and the world that we live in. Shana Tova, everybody.
Shana Tova.
We hope you'll join us at 3
That's
o'clock for our healing service.
Yes,
Thank
that'll be
you.
a lot of 3 o'clock healing service. Yeah. And
And
we'll see you all
4:15 for
soon.
afternoon, Yisker and Naila.
This was excellent. I really appreciated it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank
Sheila.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi and Cantor.
Thank
It
you.
was wonderful.
Yep. Everyone be well.